Welcome, everybody. I'd like to call together the meeting of City Council October 8th. Ms. Fleeka?
Mr. Rogers?
Here.
Ms. Ramsey?
Here.
Mayor Pons?
Here.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Here.
Mr. Maslin?
Here.
You all have in your packet some 6 minutes entries for approval. Does anybody have any questions, thoughts?
So on the February meeting minutes, I know that they're abbreviated, but one of the things I thought when we were meeting with the Architectural Review Board that we all agreed was we wanted to have a follow-up joint meeting with them maybe after the first section that they were reviewing. And I know COVID came along then, but I think we need to memorialize that and then ask for when we're going to actually be able to do that.
Okay.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Maslin. We actually are aware of that. We've been working on scheduling it. We were talking about having that meeting occur this month or next month, but we delayed it until they can complete their review of the section that you all were interested in hearing about. So as soon as they've done that, we'll have the joint meeting.
Okay, thanks. I'm good.
So we'll note that in the minutes. Okay.
So I move that we approve the council minutes for February the 10th, March the 19th, April the 9th, April the 30th, May the 11th, and May the 14th, all in 2020.
Mr. Rogers?
Abstain.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Abstain.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Thank you. And that takes us to reports, monthly financial statement. Who's going to kick this off?
I'm going to ask Ms. Dameron to talk to you about the COVID-19 deficit report.
Sure.
Thank you.
Before we get to the monthly, I want to do a recap of the June 30th, 2020. We've completed our audit field work, and I'm not anticipating any changes at this point. Looking at the chart, you can see that our revised deficit, and that is actually in comparison to our adopted budget at this point, that variance. Our real estate taxes came in $194,000 better than budgeted. Part of that is the $110,000 that we appropriated later in the year related to the real estate tax assessment increase. That was $110,000, and then we had some supplemental billings for the new development. Our personal property came in better than budgeted by $95,000, and certainly better than our worst-case scenario that we anticipated with COVID-19. Our lodging tax, we did better than our worst case, but we were under our adopted budget by $995,000. And they performed at about 70% of budget. The meals tax came in, again, better than our worst case, but almost $1.3 million under our budget. They actually performed at 82% of budget. Our sales tax for education, we were anticipating a decrease in that, but actually we ended the year just slightly under budget by $25,000. Then we had CARES funding. And to the extent that we had expended some of that funding, it was included as revenue in the budget that was unbudgeted by the tune of $219,000. And then our other revenues were $176,000 better than budgeted, not quite at what we had anticipated with our projection, however. And just to give you a sense of what made up that $176,000, it was a combination of items over and under budget. Significant items that were over budget, the top of the list is permitting that came in $278,000 over budget. And of course, that was related to Midtown Road and other projects that came online. Under our miscellaneous category, which includes EMS recovery and payment in lieu of taxes, those combined were over budget by $65,000, with the EMS recovery coming in at $40,000 over and payment in lieu of taxes at $16,000 over budget. Other local taxes combined were over budget by $64,000. Recordation came in at $84,000 over budget. bank stock tax came in at 28,000 over. And this was offset by a decrease or coming in under budget in communication tax by 20,000, cigarette tax by 14,000, and then a combination of other netted variances, smaller variances that netted out to a under budget of 14,000. We also had some general property tax that was not included in the real estate or personal property that came in over budget by 63,000. The majority of this was delinquent business personal property. And then items that came in under budget were rental of facilities at 138,000 under budget. Now, this includes things like the rental of rooms in this building as well as the community building, and also the Triangle building. That actually came in under about 81,000. And the Prince George parking garage, we saw that coming in under budget by 38,000. Also, Parks and Rec fees came in under budget by about 128,000, and this was largely athletics, classes, and Waller meal, things that we were not able to do early in COVID or have available. And then our fines were under 62,000. That was predominantly parking fines. So the end result is we had revenues coming in under budget at about 1.6 million. We had expenditures coming in under budget by 975,000. And so at the end of the day, we'll be drawing down fund balance to the tune of $585,000, significantly better than the 4.2 million worst case scenario that we were prepared to address.
Good, thank you. Well, I'm glad we're not down 4.2. 580 is much better.
Oh, absolutely.
But we still have a long way to go going into 2021, FY21. Any other questions for Ms. Dameron regarding this?
I still have September to go.
Yeah, that'd be the telling.
Yeah.
Yep, keep going.
Okay, so with this slide, what I'm really comparing to is some cash flow projections I did of how I anticipated that the money would flow during the year. And so with real estate, we really don't anticipate a lot of real estate tax revenue coming in before the first due date in December 1st. We did have a little bit there, so we're slightly over. Personal property tax, we're almost 10,000 beyond or better than what I had projected we'd be at this point in the year. However, lodging tax, we're $191,000 under. They're actually performing at about 56% of our projection. Meals tax is performing about $69,000 better than projected, and that equates to about 8.5% better than the projection. However, they're still 37% less than last year. Our B-poll is coming in a little bit better than projected. We typically don't see a lot of revenue there until March. Our sales tax for education continues to perform better than projected. During the first quarter, we're about $49,000 ahead of the projection. Other revenues are $108,000 ahead of our projection. Just to give you a taste of that, we really didn't anticipate a large collection of delinquent taxes, but we have taxes exceeding our projection at $197,000. 133 of that's delinquent real estate taxes. Our permits continue to perform better than the projected at this point by about $34,000. And then within that, we have some timing differences. So we get a reimbursement from James City County for the Arts Commission support of that, and that came in September this year instead of October as projected, so that accounts for some of that as well. In terms of things that offset those items performing better than the projection, again, we have the parking fines coming in a little bit under, about $35,000 at this point. Also, our rental of facilities, and that would include the Prince George parking garage. Combined, it's about $33,000 under. The Prince George parking garage accounts for about $15,000 of that. And probably the largest item we have at this point is the EMS recovery fees, and that's coming under our projection at this point by about $97,000. Combined, though, our total revenues are doing a bit better than the projection by about $80,000. Also, our expenditures are performing under the projection by about $1.1 million. Again, there's some timing differences in that projection, and a good example would be I had projected, based on history, that the schools would draw down about $2.1 million during the first quarter, and they're at $1.8 million. At this point, we're performing $1.2 million better than our projection. So we will continue to monitor this, and we will continue to look at where there are timing differences. In addition to that, for the remainder of the report, some significant information is our sales tax is performing about 30% better than our projection, yet it's 23% decrease compared to September of FY20. Our historic sales tax is performing better, also 30% better than projected. However, at first look, you would think that it's a 2% decrease compared to where we were September last year. But when you analyze that, the state withheld some of the August distribution to September. And so when we really look at that, we are about 32% below where we would have projected to be. And I was also able to obtain, even though we haven't collected our October tax yet, I do know what that number will be, and it continues to be about 31% behind what we would have projected. We're also noting a decrease in water consumption by 17%, and sewer consumption by 7%. So we will continue to stay on top of some of these variances from our projection, as well as the decrease in consumption with utilities, and continue to keep you updated on that. I also am taking a look at cash pretty close now, although I do think that we have enough in our reserves to carry us through. I will just note that once I adjust for the bond funds, because they are for specific public safety spending, we are about 12% below where we are or where we were last year at this time. And that concludes my report. I'll be glad to address any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Dameron. I don't have any questions, but just overall comments on all the information you provided. As the mayor's already mentioned, where although the numbers aren't where we would like them to be, there are some encouraging numbers in there. And thanks to you and your staff and Mr. Trivett for painting that worst-case scenario and obviously performing in a lot of areas better than anticipated. So we hope that continues as, again, we're in a pandemic that's lasted much longer than any of us would have hoped. So there is some encouragement in there, even though the numbers aren't where we would like to see them.
A question on the lodging, the shortfall. Is any of that due to maybe a delay in terms of payments? Are you seeing a trend?
No, we're pretty, there's some delay, and it's typical that we may not get everything by the due date, but we'll pick it up and it'll show up in the following month. But I'm not seeing significant delays in that as much as just it's an impact of the economic reality. I know that the lodging is down. I think they're like operating at about 11%, the rooms, so that's what we're seeing there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, and I don't have any questions. I would just like to reiterate what Vice Mayor Dent said, that appreciate the information as it's presented, and also I'm glad that we did create a worst-case scenario so we can have some comparable information on that. And hopefully, as time goes on, we will tweak those numbers a little closer. Thank you.
I echo my council colleagues in showing our gratitude for your work. Director Dameron, thank you very much. I have no questions.
Thank you, man. Okay, takes us to monthly department operating reports. We have them. Yes, sir.
Is that mic portable
It does.
for the chief?
It does.
Yeah, just a couple questions on public safety. The dashboard reports. So the good news we see in the dashboard reports in terms of accidents, both on pedestrian accidents and vehicle injury accidents, is that they're down compared to what our goal was, which is good. And we talked yesterday, maybe some of that's due to the COVID.
Correct.
Reduced driving. What, in terms of when we do see accidents, are we still seeing distracted drivers as a major cause of these accidents?
Generally speaking, certainly.
And did we have a new law come into effect July 1 regarding cell phone use?
I believe we did, Mr. Maslin.
Yeah, so as we get into more traffic, and are there any campaigns that you can see either statewide or that we're going to be doing locally to try to sort of communicate the new law and then also get people to pay more attention?
Sure, yeah, well, as you might imagine, it's an ongoing effort for us. We certainly know that our community is much safer when folks are following the rules and paying attention to the road and having a designated driver when they're driving and that sort of thing. So we will continue to do enforcement as well as education and other steps to try to prevent that. We've recently done some things around the college where we've got the crosswalks that not recently, but over the years, we've seen an increase of pedestrian accidents there. And so we actually, fortunately, were awarded some grant funding. So we were able to deploy some officers in that area, again, for education and prevention, but there were also a couple of summonses issued to motorists who did not yield the pedestrians who were in the crosswalk. So all of those efforts will continue. And again, I'm very proud to see that the accidents are down, but I certainly have to recognize that the tourism and the vehicular activity in the city is also down.
And regarding pedestrian safety, I think we need to have another shout out to the William and Mary Student Assembly for funding crosswalks, right?
Sure, absolutely. The William and Mary Student Assembly has been wonderful partners with us. And in fact, not only are we engaged to have that feedback to understand what some of the concerns are so that we can better address them, but we've also done some things like we've been in the pedestrian crosswalk as it gets darker earlier in the evening to hand out reflective devices to the students so that they're more aware of the dangers and of the types of things that we're seeing. And again, these are the initiatives that might not have surfaced were it not for the partnership that we share with the William and Mary Student Assembly. So yeah, appreciate you pointing that out. It is a wonderful partnership.
That's great. Then pivoting to the Prince George Street garage, we're on target there in terms of this month. We're actually exceeding the number of vehicles that we needed. Year to date, though, we're short a little bit. But I think that's only going to get better, especially with Colonial Williamsburg charging twice as much in the P2 lot, the lot behind Barnes & Noble. Don't you think we'll see more and more?
Well, I don't know about that being the reason for it, but I can certainly say that it does seem that there is an uptick in folks coming down to visit our wonderful city, our wonderful Colonial Williamsburg. And so I think that for that, the trajectory is on the right path for sure.
And I know I've been using it a lot more. It's so easy just to drive in and drive out because all the information's on file already.
Sure, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and as we discussed yesterday, we're having a little issue with the counter, but our IT director is working with the company and the vendor, and we're really trying to get that straight. I think we've disabled that for the moment because of the little bit of a glitch there, but that is part of an ongoing effort.
I liked it on Saturday, Drew, because it kept on showing we had like 290 spaces when it was probably 2/3 full. Mm-hmm. But I thought that was part of our marketing campaign.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, plenty of spaces.
Right.
Come on in. But it never filled up, which was good. Thanks, Chief.
Thank you.
Anything else?
I do.
Yeah.
Point of personal curiosity, I imagine the public may be curious as well. I was looking through the Public Works section of the monthly reports and saw the restoration of historic streets. Any indication on when the resurfacing of Dog Street would be complete and where that is in the timeline?
So I think you're asking, we had indicated we were going to put a top layer coat on Duke of Gloucester Street. So that's a good question. We're currently wrestling with that right now.
Okay.
We had indicated that we had a product that we were testing for that application. Unfortunately, the test didn't turn out the way we had hoped. So we're currently evaluating whether we're going to move ahead with that application or do something else.
Okay.
So we'll be putting some information out about that soon. We just finished cleaning up for a third time the test strip that we applied, and we're going to see how that looks. But at this point, we're not sure we're going to be able to use that product.
Okay, thank you. And Director DeWitt was looking through some of the monthly reports and found that there was a high number of extra businesses that had been registered in the city for what it seemed after March. The average was around 795, but then it shot up to 857 after March. I was just curious how that may have happened as it was reported through the data.
We also noticed that, council member, and I've asked, we received those numbers from the Commissioner of the Revenue, and I need to get with her and ask what, I believe it may be a recalculation after business licenses come in.
Okay.
I mean, I hope it's true, but it's probably that the terminations were not factored into that number. So it's on our list to work on that. Thank you for pointing that out.
Okay, yeah, point of curiosity there, and then my final one is just another commendation. I saw that the averages in the businesses assisted reporting section was 9s and 10s, but then after COVID went up to 30, 66, 82, and really started peaking with all the outreach that you all were doing to local businesses. So thank you very much for all the assistance.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. City Manager report?
Yes, Mayor, 2 items. The first is that we are in the process of working through the solicitation on the fire station construction. And just to let you know, we have received 7 responses. They're being evaluated now for completeness and satisfaction of the requirements. So can't tell you how many will qualify for review, but we did receive total in response. And then I wanted to mention, we've been dealing with COVID-19 now for some time. And while we've been doing a good job with our protocols internally for cleaning departmental spaces and building areas, we do want to do a deep clean. And we're looking at scheduling that it will start Friday of next week. And so I wanted to let you know that as part of that, there will be at least a half a day closure of the municipal building so that we can clean all those office spaces during the day. We will be making sort of independent arrangements with all the various departments and constitutional offices that have requirements for buildings, for their spaces to be open, particularly the registrar right now, Quarter Path Recreation Center where we're doing the daycare, so that we can get in there when the spaces are empty to do the deep clean. Just wanted to let you know there'll be more information coming out about that, and we'll be alerting the public as well.
Thank you. Any questions?
Mr. Trivet, just looking at through the reports, just so for the public to know, there hasn't been a significant amount of work time missed from city employees due to COVID.
No, I mean, we've had employees that have missed work because they were either exposed or in some cases thought to be positive until they were tested, those types of instances. But no, we've not had nearly the exposures or positives inside the city workforce that some of our colleague institutions have. But I will tell you that in the last week, we've had a number of near misses that we've been very fortunate about, but we are seeing a much more closer to home experience with COVID-19 this past week and a half than we have probably the last 6 months.
And I did notice today that New Kent put out a public message that they've seen a significant increase in COVID cases, so they're asking everyone to, reminding everyone about social distancing and mask and meeting in small groups.
Right. I think it's important that we all understand this isn't over yet. And, I think everybody has COVID-19 fatigue. dealing with the protocols and the restrictions to maintain safety. But for an organization our size, it's critically important that we not let down our guard. And like I said, in the last few weeks, we've had some very close calls that could have put us in a bad spot from a staffing perspective in some of our critical areas.
Thanks.
Well, I'll just take a moment to add, even out in the broader community, I think it's important that we all stay vigilant and wear our mask and keep our hands cleaned and to ourselves, and avoid unnecessary contact, because for one person it can spread very easily, and the last thing any of us want is more greater spreading and economic shutdown. So, okay, Shelton, anything?
I have several items under new business, but nothing at this time.
Okay. I don't believe we have any unfinished business. That's going to take us to new business. I'm going to take the privilege of rearranging the agenda, and I'd like to bring up the school folks first. So item B, consideration of resolution 20-18 authorizing the FY20 school year-end spending plan totaling $80,623 and amending the FY21. That's the wrong one. Sorry. Yeah, it is. Okay. Yep. That's it. So, Ms. Dameron.
Yes, the schools each year you generally have a surplus, and for FY20, that surplus amounted to about it amounted to $5.8 million. Our share of that amounts to $548,713. They in turn come back and request or have a spending plan that is presented both to City Council and the James City County Board of Supervisors. Their plan this year, their request in total amounts to $850,450 in projects. The city's share of that is $80,623. In summary, those projects are for a digital curriculum, an air filtration purifier, protective learning shields, and child care assistance. I know that Dr. Heron is here from the school board that could probably answer any questions related to those projects. But it is the staff's recommendation that City Council approve this contingent upon James City's approval of the same or similar projects or any portion of projects therein.
Okay. Are there any questions? Dameron?
So I just had a couple questions. You said that this plan would be contingent upon James City County approving, and do we know when they're?
I believe their meeting is October 13th, so next week.
All right, and I believe that in the information that we received from the school board, they were asking for a portion of the surplus to be returned to them or kept by them. So has this been taken into consideration with all of your figures?
Yeah, I believe that was taken in consideration through our budget process. And in fact, it seems like forever, and it seems like that budget process happened a really long time ago
Right.
with everything else that's going on. But to my recollection, that has occurred, and as I recall, at the time that we were preparing the budget, we had a slight bit more in addition to what we needed to balance, and it was council's desire that we also keep that in there. So if you compare to the James City County budget, typically you can see that breakdown in support. The percentage, and ours is roughly 10%. And I believe that we are going to be just about 60,000, a little bit ahead of that due to that.
Okay, thank you. And then the remainder of the money that would come back to us after returning the 80,000 back to the school board, if we approve this, where would that go in the city?
That falls to our fund balance. So what would happen, in fact, we've already accrued that for June 30th, so it is included in the June 30th presentation that I showed you. So what we would have, once this is approved, we would be pulling $1,623 from our fund balance to support this. We typically get that check in October, and so they actually send the full amount back, and then we add this to our appropriation and send it to them.
All right, just wanted to make sure everyone was aware that all the numbers have been accounted for. Thank you.
So I'm perfectly comfortable with this as well, so happy to entertain a motion.
So I move that City Council approve Resolution 20-18 contingent upon and consistent with the James City County Board of Supervisors approving the projects in the WJCC spending plan.
Second.
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Just thank everybody from the school for showing up. Hopefully it wasn't a waste of time. Made it nice and easy for you, but thank you, Dr. Herron, and all your staff for coming in and all the hard work that you all do. Okay, so that's going to take us to item A, consideration and adoption of ordinance 20-17 to exclude electric power-assisted bicycles from the prohibition on motor vehicles operating on the historic streets. Ms. Shelton.
This is a housekeeping matter for council. The General Assembly added section 46.2, 904.1 to the Code of Virginia this year, which essentially removes electric power-assisted bicycles from the definition of motor vehicles and allows them to operate on all streets in the Commonwealth. As our definition for motor vehicles is written in section 11266, that exclusion didn't exist. So all power-assisted bicycles, whether they be electric or gasoline power-assisted bicycles, were included in our definition. So this amendment to the code simply removes the electric power-assisted bicycles from our prohibition so they can operate on the areas in the historic area where you've closed the street to motor vehicles.
Questions?
No questions.
No questions.
So again, we're allowing electric-assisted vehicles in the historic area, but you cannot have a petroleum.
That's correct.
Okay. Hearing no questions, is there a motion?
So I'll move that City Council adopt proposed ordinance 20-17.
Second.
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Yeah, takes us to item C, consideration and adoption of resolution number 20-19, authorizing the city manager to execute all documents necessary to effectuate the city of Williamsburg's participation in the Kings Creek Commerce Center project of the Eastern Virginia Regional Industrial Facilities Authority. Trivet, will you be taking this?
Yeah, since this is an economic development item, I'm going to ask Michelle DeWitt, who has infinitely more knowledge about it than I do, to tackle the report.
Thank you, Drew, and thank you, Mayor and members of City Council. It's quite a mouthful, the name of this project at Kings Creek. What I'm going to do is talk about the timeline of how we got to having a Regional Industrial Facilities Authority in Eastern Virginia. Then I'm going to talk about this specific project, which is the Kings Creek project, and talk about the way that the city can be involved in it, and then talk about the reasons why the city should be involved in it. So I'll take you through that slideshow. The project started in 2016. When the economic development directors on the peninsula, we started to get together. Go Virginia had just come about. We knew that funding was available. We were looking for a regional project that made sense on the peninsula for us to further economic development. And that brainstorming happened and led to a discussion of this property located in York County, owned by the Commonwealth of Virginia right now. And it's situated on an old fuel farm, but it's situated in a great place to allow for unmanned systems, or what we call drones. And we knew that the businesses in the area need a place to practice and use their drones. This is allowed by the FAA to do that. And when we're talking about these unmanned systems, it's not just the air drones, which we think of, it's also land and water-based drones. And there is water, Kings Creek, that goes out to the York River on that property. So that was a project that was conceived many years ago, as you see, and was sort of happening in the background as the RIFA was formed. The RIFA was identified as a way in the state code to allow you to do regional projects across localities, boundaries. And we received a Go Virginia grant to form an Eastern Virginia Regional Industrial Facilities Authority. So that happened in October of 2018. This body joined that group, and it had its first meeting in March. We were all sworn in. And one of the projects that the authority at that point identified was this unmanned systems project at Kings Creek. Formed a committee to investigate that, look at all the details of how this could work out, and that led to this time period now, the fall of 2020, and a determination of who wants to participate and what their cap of investment would be to participate. So the way regional revenue sharing agreements occur is you share in the cost of a project, but then you also share in the revenue from the project, whether that be sale of land, lease of property or buildings, or actual tax revenue that's located on that property. So that brought us here. The property, the map that we had by GIS was great, but it was very, very busy. So I took a snapshot from Google Maps to show you where this is located. And you can see the star. This is the facility. Many of you remember when this was going to be developed into a golf course, Hawk's Nest, I believe. But it's right south of the Colonial Parkway and just north of Water Country, USA. You may have been to the Jamestown Yorktown Foundation offices, which are located right here on this property. So as the deal, taking many years to come together, is we received a budget amendment in the state code that requires the Commonwealth of Virginia to sell this property to the RIFA at a certain price. That price is $1.35 million. We also have a prospect, a solar company, who wants to lease the property for 37 years, and your AIS was incorrect. It's a 37-year lease. There was a typo there. For $1.35 million. So what would happen, those transactions would happen simultaneously. The EV RIFA would be in possession of the property and also have that lease for 37 years with KDC Solar. And you see these yellow hatches show where the solar farm would be located. I received a map this morning that shows it has shifted a little bit to the east, which actually frees up more land for the RIFA to develop and used for other economic development efforts. We have a preliminary budget, there it is, for this property. There will be some closing costs associated with this. While the simultaneous closing will cover that $1.35 million, there will be some appraisal costs, some closing costs, and you can see that the first year budget is estimated at $71,000. But there's also some revenue. KDC Solar will pay $15,000 a year as part of their lease agreement to help with maintenance and other things. And then we're looking at what do the localities want to participate in, these blank numbers here. And so that's sort of we don't have an exact number now because we don't know how many localities will be participating. So they're asking each locality to say they'll participate up to a certain amount for this project. And carrying costs do lower because you no longer have the closing and appraisal cost in year 2, but there are some costs to make sure the property is maintained and taken care of in that sense. So this first phase, this is what we're talking about, a commitment to this, a commitment to join this project, to purchase the property, to lease the property to the solar farm, and then own that property. There's about 25 acres on the property that, I'll go back to the crazy map, if I can. Down here, 25 acres of the property in green right here currently is accessible by roads and utilities and could be sold tomorrow to an industrial or a commercial user. So that's already there. And then property up here is identified as developable, would be some cost to put some roads and other things in there. But this is quite an asset for the RIFA to gain for basically negligible amount of money because we're getting the money from the lease. So that's what we're talking about. So phase 1, would commit Williamsburg to this transaction, and then also proceeds if any of these properties were sold to a private industry. That would be the revenue sharing piece of it. So what do we do now? That's where we are, next steps. So the Economic Development Authority met in September and reviewed this analysis in this project, and they recommend that City Council participate up to $20,000 the first year. And the EDA has budgeted those funds, and those funds would be paid by the EDA for this project. So City Council will determine participation, and then the property must close by the end of the year, so this would happen pretty quickly. The RIFA is scheduled to meet October 21st, I believe, and Barb Ramsey is your representative there. And you can see below, here are the list of localities who are considering participation. York, Isle of Wight, and Poquoson have already taken this action, signed a resolution authorizing their CAO to effectuate to sign the documents to effectuate the participation agreement. And Franklin, Hampton, and Newport News, and Williamsburg, of course, are also considering it. Now we talk about sort of why would we want to do regional economic development. So in Williamsburg, we have a tiny bit of industrial land owned by Colonial Williamsburg, but not much at all. There's 2 5-acre parcels there. So we really don't have access to land that's more typically in the rural or suburban areas for industrial products. So this gives us access to that as a developer, but also as the tax collector as well. It's low risk with high reward potential in terms of this phase 1 project. We'll be purchasing property at basically no cost because of the lease we'll be executing. And there is an upside there. There's developable land there with infrastructure already that can be sold. We'll also be setting a cap on our risk. Future phases would require a unanimous vote of participants. So let's say 5 localities join into this, and only 4 of them say we want to spend $1 billion on something. Well, if the 5th one says no, it doesn't happen, or it happens without that 5th member. So any future phases, future cost, you would need to agree to in order to move forward. So there's that safety net. And then ultimately, in terms of the economic health of our region, this is providing economic diversification. Unmanned systems is one of the highest wage jobs, sectors. It's a growth sector. It also aligns with William & Mary. They've supported this project since the beginning, particularly with the sensor and water work at VIMS. They're very interested in this project. So it really fits in all our niches here. We're excited about it. So staff in the economic development recommend that City Council adopt the resolution. It now has a number to participate in the agreement, and then that participation be capped at $20,000 the first year and $10,000 in subsequent years, and that the EDA has committed to provide the funds to the project. So my counterpart in York County, Economic Development Director Jim Noel is here, as well as the EV RIFA Counsel, Steve Mead. So if you have any questions that really go into deep detail, they're available in the back of the room to come forward and address any questions. As am I.
Thank you. A lot of good information. Mr. Vice Mayor Dent.
Thank you. Just one question that obviously you've outlined very well the benefits of Williamsburg participating in this program and benefit from any proceeds from sale of property or business. What, if we make the decision that Williamsburg, if we pass this resolution and then 3 or 4 years down the road, how does Williamsburg opt out? Or is there an opportunity for us to opt out?
Sure, and I'm going to ask Mr. Mead to come address the details of how that would happen, Councilperson Dent. But as a body, you can't commit future councils to things that they don't know about yet because they don't exist. But Steve will be happy to introduce.
Welcome, Steve.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council, Mr. Manager. There is a provision provided, and it basically mirrors what's in the state act for RIFAs, and basically what it allows is if you provide for whatever you have committed to for the existing fiscal year, and then for the following fiscal year, then you can walk away. It also allows the agreement that we're asking you to agree to and sign has a provision for a negotiation. And so if there's 6 localities and you're the one who wants to leave, there's the ability to agree with those other localities for something that's even different from what's allowed by state code. So you are allowed to walk away. It's a 5-year initial term on the agreement and renews automatically for 1 year after that. But, we've had questions about could we stay in for 30 years? The answer is yes. Could we be out after 1 year? The answer is also yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, following up on what Michelle said, I think it's very important that the city of Williamsburg invest in these types of partnerships on a regional basis, since we have very little offer in terms of attracting industrial prospects. A couple questions in terms of the application, though. So when we were reviewing the big e-mobility issues, we talked about geofences. And we know that we've got significant federal installations all around us. Is there something that's a geofence for drones that won't allow them to go into those areas?
Yeah, fascinating question, Councilmember Maslin. That was one of the first questions that the staffs had about this being next to the Naval Weapons Station. Naval Weapons Station is 100% supportive of this. And I'll say primarily because they do not want a residential use there. They do want an industrial use, but they're very aware of the drone aspect of this project and support it wholeheartedly.
The second question on that is in terms of the solar farm, having experience with prospective solar farms near aircraft facilities, are there any flight paths that we're worried about in terms of the orientation of the solar panels?
Another great question that we asked. The solar farm company is actually delighted to have this, to co-locate with this use. They actually use drones themselves to check out their panels instead of manpower. So they have assured us that it's a compatible use from their perspective.
But what about aircraft, military and civilian?
Military aircraft.
Is there anything is it in a flight path that we have to be concerned with reflectivity?
Let me see if our expert in the back of the room.
Jim's shaking his head
Saying no.
No, answer is no.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Thank you.
Thanks for the presentation, and as a member of RIFA, having been through the past couple years, first I want to commend the perseverance of your counterpart, Jim Noel, because I think without his doggedness, we might not be here, and looking at all different ways of funding, and thanks to Senator Norman who put in the budget amendment for the land to be purchased. So it was mentioned that a number of municipalities are looking at this. Do we know when they will consider and vote on joining this project?
My understanding is that they will be on their agendas this month.
Okay.
Yes.
And if additional if additional ones would want to join in, is there a deadline by which they have to decide, since we're closing December 31st? Because I assume they have to make the decision to join in before the closing occurs.
Yes, and I'll see if Steve knows the exact date, but that did come up. We had a locality who wanted to wait and join later, which did not seem fair when you're talking about everyone having to take the same risk, not waiting to see if it's successful and join later. See if there is an actual date.
There's not an actual drop dead date, but you're exactly right. I mean, we have discussed this with all the localities. Several of them told us early on the project's not for us. Franklin has made a decision really very recently that they're not going to be part of it. So really it's the 6 that we're left, including the city, and we're expecting all those to go forward. If another jurisdiction were to join the RIFA board, as you know, it's happened 3 times already
Right.
since we formed, there would be the opportunity for them to discuss it with us, but it would be up to the localities who agree to participate now to decide if they could come in and on what terms. So it really, if you do it now, you would be in control of that situation.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
And who will be sort of responsible for marketing the rest of the property, such as the 25 acres? Will there be, like, York County be the primary sort of agent for that?
Yes, York County would certainly be the primary, but would happen under the auspices of the EV RIFA.
So
Would have
any-
all those resources of all those economic development departments and those board members, so much larger resources. But certainly, Greater Williamsburg Partnership and York County, since it's in their backyard, would take the lead.
And I think there's already been a number of options and possibilities mentioned for those areas, in addition to the drone,
Correct.
the testing of the drones. So, thank you, I fully support it. I don't have any other questions at this time.
Rogers?
Thank you very much, Director DeWitt, for your presentation. I think we were well guided by the City Council of 2018 in their recommendation to join this group.
I said they were good people back then.
Yeah, good people. I'm thrilled with it and remember hearing about it years ago and being very excited. You know, technological innovation is ongoing, and we have giant hubs for that around us, certainly with the transatlantic cables going into Virginia Beach. We'll bring in a lot of new jobs, a lot of those high-paying jobs you spoke into that region, and we'll have to position ourselves to capitalize on some of that as well. So even though this isn't within the city limits, not that we may have the room for it within the city limits, a high tide raises all boats in that way. And I have no doubt that it will be incredibly beneficial for our reason, applicable to some of our major institutions. My one comment would be, I spoke recently on a Peninsula Climate Solutions panel and learned that there's a special resource the city could provide to the solar farm. With all the grass around it, it's difficult to mow and not wanting to chip some of the panels. So a lot of solar farms use sheep for their grazing, and we have a plethora of those in Williamsburg. So perhaps we could provide sheep as one other level of our participation. But thank you very much for the recommendation. I'm very excited to support it as well.
Thank you. Can we find sheep? Yeah.
And goats.
So when we talk about sharing, the cost, I think, is understandable, and you talked about sharing in some of the proceeds of sale of property. What other forms of revenue might we be sharing in?
So the forms could be a direct land sale, which would be a cash payment when the land is sold. But also, if this subgroup of the EV RIFA decides to build buildings and lease them out, they have all those abilities under the state code, just like your Economic Development Authority does. So if they decided to pursue the unmanned systems through a grant program and you did a feasibility study and it made sense, we could be one of the group that is a landlord receiving rental income as well. And York County has also pledged to share tax revenue from the property.
Such as BPOL tax and real estate tax as well?
Exactly.
Okay.
And the 5% of all the proceeds goes to the EV RIFA, so I want to be clear about that. So that would be under any of those categories as the sort of umbrella organization, but the rest would be divided amongst the localities who are participating in the percentage that they participated in the cost.
Yeah, I think if you look at the documents, it says that 90% of the returns will go to the participating localities, 5% goes to the EV RIFA, and 5% goes to the host locality.
Which would be York County.
Well, I agree with the sentiment of council. I think it's a great opportunity for us to participate in helping to bring something to the region that we don't have today. And so I think this, while we've had partnerships in the past, this is certainly something new, I think, to us to do something like this. So with that, Ms. Ramsey.
Sure. I move that City Council adopt Resolution 20-19, authorizing the city manager to execute all documents necessary to effectuate the City of Williamsburg's participation in the Kings Creek Commerce Center project of the Eastern Virginia Regional Industrial Facility Authority of RIFA.
Second.
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Thank you both for coming in and sharing your thoughts and helping get this done. Okay, so that takes us to item D, consideration and adoption of resolution number 20-21, establishing the City of Williamsburg's tourism industry COVID-19 relief grant program. Ms. DeWitt?
Yes, thank you, Mayor and members of council. Before you today is a consideration of another round of COVID relief for our local businesses. And we're proposing that this be targeted to our tourism industry that's been affected extensively by COVID-19, from mitigation measures to also travel declines, which have happened nationwide. So when we're looking at two industries within that industry, it would be our lodging establishments, which are seeing unprecedented decrease in overnight visitation. We dropped to 11% while we reported this number in July. This was actually 11% was the occupancy rate in June for our businesses. It has gone up in August to 22%, but that's still abysmally low. So they're seeing it's eliminating their revenue for these city businesses. So that's one business we're proposing be targeted with this relief. The other would be restaurants, whose sales have decreased because of the governor's orders requiring that occupancy inside of restaurants be lower than 100%, and that and fewer people are dining out because they're uncomfortable going about during a pandemic. So these are the industries that are hurting the most in the city, and we recommend as staff that these be targeted under a second COVID-19 relief grant from the city. And some of the details of that, as I said, it would be lodging establishments and restaurants, and then there's some general criteria that they would need to meet. The first being they would need to physically be located in the city and have a city business license. They would need to have been open for business as of March 1st, prior to the pandemic, and still be open for business. They need to be current on all their tax payments due to the city. And we've put something in here that if a balance is due to the city, the business can choose to use these grant funds to satisfy that balance, which is something we ran into when administering the other grant program. If somebody owed, I'm going to make these numbers up, they owed $50, their grant was $100, they had to write a check for $50 and then to get a check back from us for $100. So this is to try to ease with some of that paperwork. And then lastly, timeshares are not eligible for this program as proposed. I spoke with the Hotel Motel Association as well as other department heads. Timeshares receive their revenue a little differently than hotels in terms of people buying in, not when they're traveling, but every year. So timeshares not being eligible at this point. Additional requirements that have been outlined and proposed to you are that restaurants provide a narrative description of what COVID-19 resiliency efforts they're undertaking to continue their operations, because we want to make sure they are thinking about that and thinking about how to remain viable as best they can during this pandemic. So that would be a requirement of the grant, that they explain that to us. And that the lodging industry also think about the future and think about how they're going to work their way through this by showing us a 3-year business plan, including a pro forma, to illustrate that. So we don't want to be giving a grant to a business who's going to close tomorrow. This is for businesses that are thinking about how to stay in operation. So those are the additional requirements in this proposal. The grant amounts. So we're looking at lodging establishments, doing it based on the number of rooms. 1 to 50 rooms, it would be a $7,500 grant, and it graduates up to 101 plus rooms, being a $15,000 grant. And we've budgeted through our real estate assessment tool. We know how many rooms are at each hotel, and we have budgeted for council. This would cost about $512,500. So we do know from our records what this would cost. And that each restaurant would be a flat grant at $5,000. So if you look at 100 restaurants, it'd be a $500,000 cost to make sure all restaurants in the city would be eligible to receive this. So I wanted to back up and talk about your past programs and how we got here through COVID. March 17th, the governor issued his order of public emergency where we were in a pandemic. On May 1st, the city was very quick to launch its first COVID-19 relief grant, thanks to City Council. And that was launched May 1st, and that ran through August. But in July, we also received a $500,000 grant from the state to offer up to a $5,000 grant to each of our businesses for COVID relief. And to date, 57 businesses have received $263,000, and we have 30 more applications in the pipeline. It's a first-come, first-served grant. Sorry, it's hard to talk in the mask. It's a first-come, first-served program, but the state has assured us if we hit that $500,000 mark, we can go back to the state and ask for more funds. August 31st was the closing date of that first COVID-19 business grant that City Council initiated. It ended, we spent $141,000 awarded across 110 businesses. And here we are today, looking at a second COVID-19 grant relief program with city dollars, with CARES Act funding, and that's what we're discussing today. And if this is adopted by City Council, the next step would be for the Economic Development Authority to meet, and they have scheduled a meeting for next week on October 13th, so they can legally implement this program. And then businesses would complete applications. We're proposing this a little differently than we did the last program. We're proposing that all businesses get their applications in, there's a due date, we assess them, and then everyone will get their check at the same time, rather than a rolling application as we did before. This will give council time to see how much demand there is, and how many grants will be issued, and whether there's any money remaining. And it would give you another month before the CARES Act deadline of December 31st hits to decide if you what you want to do with those extra funds. So the grants would be awarded December 1st, and then, as I said, in December, if there are funds that were untapped by businesses, they could be used for other COVID-19 relief. Here's an overview of the program, which you saw in your packet, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Excellent, thank you. Vice Mayor?
Thanks, Mr. Witt. Obviously excited to have another opportunity to provide the restaurants and the hotels with some additional help, especially with restaurants as we move into the cooler months and they have to make additional arrangements for outside seating. While we were discussing earlier this week, while over the last couple weekends has been Duke of Gloucester Street, the outside seating has been completely full when you pass through there on the weekend. So hope that continues, and hopefully the weather will accommodate us with that. One of the things you mentioned, and just for clarification on the tax payments, it's not a matter of the city's going to award the grant and then say we're going to withhold your tax. The business actually has to request that those taxes be withheld.
Yes, sir. But this may be a difference without a distinction, because one of the requirements of the grant is they must be up to date on their taxes.
Right.
But they would have to agree to that for us to subtract that amount from their grant.
And then,
in the previous grant programs, we ran into some troubles with businesses that had past due amounts, and the grant didn't specifically stipulate that we could use the grant money for that purpose. So this just makes it very clear in the beginning.
so with the excess funds, as you mentioned, if there's excess funds, we could decide what to do with those at a later time once we realize there's excess funds. But those funds have to be expended by December 31st?
So with the CARES Act money generally, not just the money that's set aside for this program, we have to have the money committed. That's a word that I like to use, by December 31st, right? So we don't necessarily have to have all the money expended, but it has to be committed to a purpose. And as Ms. Dameron and I have talked about it, we want to have invoices in hand pretty much, or applications on file, waiting award of that money. That'll give us a little extra time to complete delivery of services, delivery of goods, construction. There's a whole list of projects in the in the CARES money plan that are going to require some action. That'll probably happen after December 31st. So in December, we will come back to you at the city council meeting with a report of here's where we are based on what you've approved so far. As you know, the last time we presented that report to you, we showed you that as we move through the process of, soliciting goods, the costs come in lower, a little higher than what we maybe had estimated, and that influences how much money is available. So we'll give you sort of a concluding report at that point in December, which will tell us how much money we might have left, not just in this grant program, but generally in the CARES Act. And then we can decide collectively what we'd like to do with what's remaining.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Maslin?
Yeah, thanks for developing this program. Thanks to the EDA for their participation in that. I reached out to one of the business association leaders for their input and heard back that the grant program would be a great help I know businesses in Merchant Square are very concerned about the outlook for sales in the fourth quarter. Restaurants in Merchant Square have been greatly impacted by the COVID-19 restrictions, and any grant would be greatly appreciated. I also reached out to one of the individual restaurants and got the feedback for the last 6 months in terms of looking at their revenue. It was down actually about 38%. So they're taking significant hits. So I definitely support this program for our hotels and restaurants. We've talked in the past about, we're focusing on the businesses, what can we do for the nonprofits? Is that something you want to talk about later than this meeting, Drew, or
Oh, we can talk about it now.
is that Wendy maybe?
Sure, there's been a lot of conversation about providing assistance similar to what we've done for businesses generally and earlier in the year, and also now with this program, what can we do similarly for nonprofits? And, our response has been sort of twofold, and I have Ms. Evans here who deals with a large number of our nonprofits, but also Ms. DeWitt and Ms. Dameron too in their capacities to help provide some background information. So throughout COVID-19, we have remained in contact with those agencies that we deal with regularly that provide assistance. And when a need has arisen, we have met that need either through CARES Act direct disbursements like you did at the last meeting where we allocated money for child care. A portion of that money went to the United Way, who's doing a regional child care program. In addition to that, I think Ms. Evans has been speaking on a regular basis with the not-for-profits that she works with, and any needs that come up, they've been addressing them. One of the things that we have seen is that during COVID-19, the charitable giving has really gone up, specific to particular instances of need. That's been true here in Williamsburg too. There's also been a number of funds created, some supported by council members, that have provided assistance for not-for-profits through the Community Foundation. And in addition to that, there's been direct aid from the federal and state government to not-for-profits that didn't come through the localities. So we feel like there's a wealth of resources available at the moment. We're keeping track of what we think the trends may be as we move through the fiscal year and hope that we'll be able to meet those needs. But certainly, if there's an additional program the council would like for us to work on creating, we're happy to do that. And of course, as I said, I got the resources here and staff to answer any specific questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just had a couple questions and comments. First of all, I appreciate the flexibility that's been accorded to these grants, particularly for the restaurants, because we don't know exactly how one versus another may want to use the funding. And how do you all plan on getting the word out to all of the businesses that'll be impacted?
Sure. Great question, Councilwoman Ramsey. We hope that our friends at the press who are listening today will help get the word out through their coverage of this program. We also will do, as we did with the other programs, mail a postcard to each business at their mailing address and use social media and then other word-of-mouth contacts through the Business Council and other allies.
And I just want to confirm for the public that this money is coming from CARES funding, so it's not something that's being taken from our reserve or from our budget.
Yes, ma'am.
And when I was at the EDA meeting yesterday, we went over this, but it was also brought to our attention how many other businesses have already been helped out by the business grant program and then the CDBG. And I was really surprised at sort of the breadth and depth of those businesses. And I thought it might be helpful to share with the public and council some of those that have benefited from the work that you all have been doing.
Sure. We've really seen across all industries in both the two grant programs that I mentioned today, the CDBG and the first COVID relief that City Council did. And the one industry we saw a little bit from, but not as much, was professional services. And so we delved into that a bit. What's going on there? The ones we saw were typically in the health-related fields who were feeling the effect of COVID-19. The others that were in maybe finance or business counseling, or the operations were okay and they hadn't seen the losses that the others did. So that accounts for that, but we still did have professional services in the mix. We also had what we categorize as cities in Virginia as business and personal services. So everything from the hair salon, which we know were closed for quite a while, to dog walking services, just all those activities that are such an important part of our economy that were hit. And then we also saw some entertainment, and then the lodging and restaurants, of course, but they really were across the board. I say except for those professional services, we didn't see as much need there, which we were glad for. We were glad that they were still, most of them already knew and had the tools to operate electronically by Zoom and those means, so they were able to adapt to that as well. But to your point, we saw it across all industries.
Because I think it's important not only for the restaurant and the lodging business, but, our goal is to keep all businesses open and keep their employees employed, because if they're not able to stay employed, then their need for other services increases, and particularly for the restaurants and the lodging, the city depends upon those taxes to help keep our real estate taxes low and the level of services high. So I think this is a great opportunity, and I thank you all for your creativity and hard work in putting this together.
I echo that. Thank you very much, Director DeWitt. Certainly the flexibility is important for our local businesses. Two questions. Would B&Bs be able to apply for this?
Yes, they will. They're considered a lodging establishment. We know that all of them will be in that first category, between
Right.
1 and 50 rooms, but they will be eligible to apply.
Wonderful. Well, that's a healthy assistance for those kind of smaller opportunities for lodging. I certainly recommend that they do. And the second was, even though that our funding needs to be committed by that December 1st, I just want to reiterate that the deadline to apply for this grant is November 16th.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, thank you very much again. I echo Councilman Maslin's comments on how important it is to have assistance for our lodging and restaurant industries. Highlight two of the numbers said by Director Dameron. Loss of lodging tax revenue was $994,000, loss of restaurant revenue 1.2 million. So incredibly necessary that we provide assistance for some of these businesses, and I'm glad that we're doing so very quickly with some of this CARES Act funding. I also recognize that the amount that has been allotted is capable of satisfying all the needs of potentially applying restaurants and lodging institutions here in the city, and I would predict that not 100% of those businesses would apply. Certainly hope they will, but that is likely a chance. So I think that, again, Councilman Maslin's comments are important, that we'll have a decision come December to allot that funding for something else. And I think a really critical thing to do, as I'll go ahead and suggest, would be to organizations, nonprofits that are in direct need. That way we are directly able to assist those that are most in need locally and whose difficulties have been exacerbated by the pandemic. But I know that'll be a decision down the road, and we'll certainly look forward to talking about that more as a council. Thank you very much for this grant funding.
And if I would just, in reply to what Councilman Rogers said as far as the deadline, when do you anticipate the first application sort of being available for people to apply?
Another great question. The EDA is scheduled to meet on Tuesday, October 13th, and then staff will have something ready that week, next week.
Good, thank you.
So going back to the timing of it all, and I know you've thought about it all very, very thoroughly, but are you really confident that deadline of November 16th, that we'll have a good understanding, because that's the deadline for applications. Pretty shortly thereafter, you'll know the amount that's being applied for. So then by our council meeting of December 8th or whatever it is, there's about 2.5 weeks there to allow council and staff to come up with some proposal as to what to do with the rest of that money. You're comfortable with that timeline? No reason to advance the deadline to say November 1st for applications?
I think
gives them less time to apply,
Right.
but the application's not going to be so complicated.
But lodging will have to come up with that 3-year business plan.
I know that this is not a popular answer, but what I would suggest we do is go with it as we have outlined. And if we realize at some point during the process that we need to adjust the timelines, we can. If we do, it'll likely be on the side of when do we present the CARES Act money to council to decide what to do with the rest of it. As I said, we've got until December 31st to commit it. It doesn't have to be awarded. It doesn't have to be expended. So that gives us a little bit of flexibility on the other side of that. I wouldn't want to shorten the amount of time that the businesses have to prepare their applications.
Fair enough. Okay, well, I think the program's a good program. You know, we need to do all we can to help our businesses, not only for the sake of the business, but for their employees. We need these businesses to be open and healthy, hopefully survive this pandemic so that their business can grow again and there'll be places for people to get jobs. Because it's really the cycle that we're trying to protect here, I believe. So, is there anyone that would like to make a motion?
Well, I move that City Council approve Resolution 20-21, establishing the City of Williamsburg Tourism Industry COVID-19 Relief Grant Program.
Second.
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Thank you, everybody. That takes us to agenda item E, update regional police mutual aid agreement. Ms. Shelton?
So from time to time, the regional mutual aid agreements that we have for public safety offices are updated, and the one that you have in front of you is for law enforcement. It's consistent with the mutual aid agreement that we currently have, so the city can request or offer mutual aid. The jurisdiction receiving the aid has to request the aid, and the officers that go into the jurisdiction have the authority to act. They're under the command of the police department, the person in charge in the jurisdiction where they respond. The city has no obligation to say that we can provide mutual aid. None of the other participating members do as well. If we do have the ability to respond, we can respond. If we don't, we can say no. That is true for all of the participating members, and the city can withdraw from this agreement with 30 days notice. So it's very consistent with what we've had for a long time, and we just keep adding jurisdictions to this agreement. And so the staff recommendation is that City Council approve the city manager to sign the mutual aid agreement.
Any questions?
Question.
Maslin?
Yeah, I had some questions for Chris on Friday, which were covered, but operational questions, maybe if the chief could come up again.
Chief, you can go to the front podium if you like.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yes,
So,
sir.
Chief, we know that with current discussions, there's a lot of emphasis on rules of engagement for police departments. And although the Commonwealth of Virginia prescribes certain common rules of engagement, that we know departments may differ in terms of their own policies on other areas. Could you just talk about how, when we've got blended police forces responding to emergencies, how do we avoid any confusion on which rule of engagement that they're going to be following?
Sure. Well, let me begin by saying I think this is just a great framework for us to operate in those instances where we need it. We do work much more closely with James City, York, and the Virginia State Police, and so this is helpful in that situation. But I think it's a great framework should there be that situation where larger number of officers are needed either to our locality or to some other locality where we can more seamlessly work through that. And so my personal experience with this over many years, particularly as a member of a Southside agency, was such that should there be let's say a hurricane, and let's say you're without power for a long time and you have a host of issues that you're dealing with from that public safety side of the house, at some point you run out of officers or that sort of thing, and so you elicit help from your neighboring jurisdictions. This again allows for that framework for us to easily do that. When those officers in again real instances have come to assist the agency that I was once with, when possible, when practical, that officer would be paired up with an officer of that jurisdiction. and that officer of that jurisdiction, whether they were both on foot, maybe at an intersection, or both in a vehicle, the officer that belonged to the primary agency of that jurisdiction would be the one who would, when appropriate, when possible, would be your primary officer initiating those types of actions, the report or the arrest or that sort of thing, so that hopefully at some point when things return to normal, the officer that came to assist that jurisdiction is back in their jurisdiction, and the officer that was with that primary jurisdiction is then able to see it through court or whatever the case may be.
Thank you.
I have no questions.
Questions either, so, a motion?
I move that City Council authorize the city manager to execute the law enforcement mutual aid agreement dated January 1, 2020.
Second?
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Next, we have a resolution to terminate a lease with Colonial Group Homes Commission and election to accept the ownership of improvements, equipments constructed and placed on city property to said lease. Ms. Shelton.
In 2007, the city entered into a lease agreement with the Colonial Group Home Commission for Crossroads Group Home. At the time, there wasn't a facility located on the property that we leased. That facility was built after the lease was executed, and the lease provides for what happens if the facility is no longer used as a group home. And with the decision of Colonial Group Home Commission to no longer operate Crossroads, we are now faced with what do we do? And so the lease agreement provides that the city council is the designated agent. The facility and the equipment that were installed on the property becomes the property of the city of Williamsburg. But there are certain procedural things that the city needs to do in order to perfect the title to the facility. That is to provide notice to the Colonial Group Home Commission along with the partner jurisdictions that we're exercising our rights under default on the lease. And that notice needs to be sent, and they have that notice for 30 days. And at the end of that 30 days, the city council has been appointed as the attorney in fact for purposes of recording a deed that transfers title to the facilities that are located on the property to the city of Williamsburg. And so the resolution in front of you authorizes the city manager to take all of those actions on behalf of the city council to effectuate the transfer of the facility that's located on the property.
Thank you.
No questions. Straightforward.
Two questions. So the way this report's written up, it looks like there's an adversarial relationship between us and York County. Has there been an attempt to actually negotiate a lease termination?
Okay, I apologize if it seems that way. There isn't. Everything is governed by the terms of the lease.
So, and they're fine with that?
They agreed to that in 2007. So there is a specific procedure that's set out in the lease. The city becomes the owner of the facility. At this point, we still have to take all of those procedural actions to perfect that title, which is what city council is approving today. Then the property belongs to the city of Williamsburg, the facility belongs to the city of Williamsburg, and then city council will have to decide what action to take with respect to that facility.
And I've spoken to the county administrator in York County, explained what the action we were going to be taking today. He completely understands it.
Okay, thanks. The second question is, are we clear in terms of ownership of equipment and furniture? In other words, and to making sure that there's no leased equipment there that may be owned by a third party, personal furniture, do we know that?
Well, so the 30-day period is to give the group home an opportunity to remove any of the equipment that's on site that's not fixed to the site, so the furniture, for example. But if they don't remove it at the end of that 30-day period of time when we convey title, that also becomes the city of Williamsburg's property. And if someone has a lease interest in something located on property, they'll need to provide the city of Williamsburg with notice that that's the case.
How would we take an affirmative action to, like if there's a copy?
They will need to notify the city of Williamsburg that they have an interest in a piece of equipment that's located on the site. There's no way that the city of Williamsburg is going to know that because that's information contained in the group home.
Well, you can reverse that. If someone's leased a copier there, how are they going to know we're doing this? How are they going to know the city's doing this action unless there's a dialogue?
Well, at some point, that lease will be in default, and the leaseor will have to make that contact, I would imagine.
So this is a public meeting, obviously, and we're going to convey title in the York County Land Records. That's legal notice for purposes of the entire world.
And I'm talking more personal property, so not the real property.
Well, again, the city's not going to necessarily know to be able to notify a lessee of tangible personal property on the site. So if there's a claim in tangible personal property on the site, they're either going to notify the group home or they're going to notify us at some point.
I mean, is that something we can inquire with the county just to double check?
I don't think the county's going to know either because
they're not?
it's operated by the commission. Wendy is our representative on the commission board. She certainly is, they're very much aware that this action is occurring. I think we have to trust that they're following their due diligence to notify their providers that they need to remove equipment if it's there.
Okay, thank you.
And I would imagine if somebody came with a claim after we take possession, we would do our due diligence and return the
course.
property accordingly.
Certainly.
Sure, there's not much there that we want, so.
And I don't have any questions. I just wanted for the public's understanding sort of the location of this property and basically why it belongs to the city and our interest in maintaining the property.
Well, I'm going to take the last part of that question and I can pass it to Drew. So the city of Williamsburg purchased this property in the early 2000s. It's a bigger piece of property than just what the group home is located on. It's adjacent to the watershed property, and then the city leased this one piece when the previous group home facility, I think it burned down, that was before my time, and they needed to replace it. And so this was the site that all the jurisdictions agreed to.
So I'll ask you to repeat the first part.
Basically, what Ms. Shelton said about the land is adjacent to the watershed, and just sort of confirming for the public why it's important for us to retain this piece of property, being next to Waller Mill.
Right, exactly. I mean, we've got a long history of buying property as it becomes available adjacent to the watershed there, or adjacent to the reservoir, and this is one example of that. So anytime that the property comes up, this is why we lease it as opposed to sell it, is to make sure that we retain ownership to protect the watershed.
Thank you.
Rogers, anything?
None for me.
So appreciate the presentation, and I don't have any questions, but I do support the initiative, so.
I move that City Council adopts Resolution 20-20 as drafted.
Second?
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
All right, so that takes us to item G, appointments to boards and commissions. Vice Mayor Dent?
I move that City Council appoint Harold Phillipson to E.V. Riffa, Deanna Valentine to the Advancing Community Excellence Board, and Susan Corbett to the Williamsburg Area Arts Commission.
Second?
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Is there any other new business that'd like to come forward?
I got one item.
Maslin?
So one item for discussion, holiday parking incentive. As most of us know, for the last 2 years, the city of Williamsburg has offered free 2-hour parking in the parking structure for the holiday. Last year it was for the month of December, and Colonial Williamsburg matched that for their, last year was their one paid parking lot, P6. I propose that we institute that again for the month of December, the first 2 hours free parking at the Prince George parking lot. And Colonial Williamsburg has offered to match that for both of their pay lots, P2 and P6.
That offer was made to the city?
Are
you aware of that?
Yeah, made to me by the Vice President of Real Estate, which is what they've done for the past 2 years.
Anybody have any comments about that?
Well, I know last year when we talked about this, we were a little uncertain as to how it would impact our budget. And we were trying to also see if there was an uptick in business in the area close to the parking garage. and downtown because of this, and I think that's probably something that's hard to measure. So I believe that this year when we were talking at our budget retreat, that we took this accommodation into account so that we are prepared to have this, is my recollection.
Correct.
Do we know roughly about what that figure was for last year, or what was?
It's typically been about 30,000,
30 to 40, I
35,000.
think.
I want to say it was in the 35 to 37,000 range.
Okay.
We did initially take it into account for the budget, and of course, COVID's changed a lot of that, but initially it was taken into account when we developed the budget.
So I'm not sure how I feel about it. I know we've got a lot of budget constraints right now. We talked a little bit about budget, about the parking numbers early on. Perhaps we can send this to staff to get some additional information for November to continue the conversation.
Yeah, we can, I know that one of the questions was correlating sales tax to this action, and we're happy to pull those numbers. Of course, we have to rely on the Commissioner of Revenue to help us with that, but, I'll just caution you, it's very difficult to draw a direct correlation because there's so many things that could influence sales tax, in that area, but we're happy to draw those numbers up and come back to you with a report next month.
A couple other factors is, one of the things we're trying to do with this is put the businesses in Merchant Square on the same par as their competition, especially Newtown, where there's no charge for parking, and incentivize people to stay longer and hopefully spend more money in Merchant Square. Also, I think that it's too early to tell, but I think we're going to be having a positive effect of more and more revenue coming down to the parking structure just because of economics. We're charging $1 and then diagonally across the street, that P2 lot's $2 an hour. So I think for the rest of the year, we'll be seeing more incentive for people to park there.
But of course, we still have other lots and streets where there's free parking. And I guess one of the hard things that goes back to what Drew was saying is the number of people who might come down and just park and walk from there and to CW and not purchase anything. But I can see the point of trying to offer that as an incentive.
Well, let's have that conversation. We'll continue it on. Just thought though, but in the desire to try to get more people down, how could we use the 35,000 if we're willing to lose that revenue? Program with the merchants to validate parking once money is spent, and I think then there would be more of a direct correlation, more of an incentive folks still to come downtown knowing that their parking could be validated, which there is a program today that we offer some validation. So maybe too much to try to put together a program like that this year, but if we're going to continue to try to do something like this in the future, I'd like to see us try to play with that a little bit to engage the merchants a little bit more in it. So thank you, Mr. Maslin. Okay, so we moves us on to the open forum part of the meeting. I do have some speakers cards. If you have not submitted one, that's fine. There'll be an opportunity for you to come forward nonetheless. So first I have, I'm not going to say it right, but Aika? Yep. And when you come forward, please state your name and address for the record, and we're going to try to limit our comments to about 5 minutes. Thank you.
Ifoma Aika, 402 Rolfe Road, Williamsburg. I am a William & Mary Senior, a government major, Undersecretary of Multicultural Affairs in Student Assembly, Reparations Co-Chair, and also a Williamsburg resident. I recognize the injustices done to the Black community on a national level. I see those same manifestations when witnessing the brutal murder of George Floyd and reading through the murder of Breonna Taylor and more. This as anyone viewing can agree, is horrendous. However, I do not just acknowledge that at a national level, Virginia is not absolved from the horrendous acts it has done on the Black community. Virginia, sometimes known as the heart of the Confederacy, born men who vehemently fought for the enslavement of other human beings with families, dreams, lives, all of which were torn away from them again and again, and still, more personal to me, the role that Williamsburg played. William and Mary historically trafficked and sold slaves, human beings. We know that Williamsburg had free people and enslaved people living within it and supported and grew the slave trade. We know that Williamsburg is not excused from its history, but is complicit in perpetrating acts of racism. And we know that these acts led to the suffering that affected Black Williamsburg residents long after the 17th and 18th century. With these things in mind, I, as a Williamsburg resident, want to see tangible policies that address and acknowledge Williamsburg part in racism, the concrete plans for the creation of the Martin Luther King Memorial Site, education efforts by the city that tell accurate histories, a partnership with the College of William and Mary and the Lemon Project to begin exploring reparations efforts. I'd be happy to help, by the way. We must remember that Williamsburg has not always been on the right side of history. This is clear. Right now, we are in a pivotal international moment to show what true racial equity looks like. And we have the chance to be on the right side of history.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have Salamez Santo. And I apologize for messing that up, kind of hard to read, but if you'll state your name and address for the record, please, I'd appreciate it.
Hello, my name is Salimata Sanfo. Everyone calls me Sally, though. I am a junior at the college, a Gov major, member of the SRI committee, and a bunch of other stuff that's not really important right now. But for the important thing, I know this is your last meeting before your GIO, retreat, where you decide next policies for Williamsburg in the coming years. And I think it's important that when we talk about these issues concerning race and equity, we remember exactly where we are. I think we always use the term here to describe Williamsburg. Well, history started here, this happened here, that happened here. But we don't understand that literally. We keep saying, oh, here, but it literally is the ground under our feet. I was in CW a couple of weeks ago and realized that literally the ground under our feet was built there by slaves. The buildings around people were eating and relaxing and having leisure time was literally built by slaves. Our bookstore used to sell slaves, and now has Lululemon inside of it. Those are literal things, they're not figurative. The here in Williamsburg is a literal kind of here. And that kind of here had damaging effects on the communities of this area. It was not a thing that just kind of happened and went away and everything was fine. The effects are still seen in the community of Williamsburg and in the community of William and Mary. Our campus has over half the buildings that are slave owners. I wrote the petition to get the renaming done, and I was surprised by how many slave owners were honored on the campus of William and Mary. And that is to the local community as well. There's a reason why students of color here have racial slurs heard at them all the time by members of the Williamsburg community. There's a reason why I have Black freshmen telling me they don't want to go to the Walmart here because they see 7 Confederate flags in the way there. There's a reason for all these things happening. And it's because we've never undone that damage. We left it there and we acknowledged it, but acknowledging is not enough and it has to be undone. Acknowledging points out that it there, but it doesn't change anything. For us to move forward as a community and build together as a community in this modern age, we have to acknowledge and undo that damage. The two have to come together to build a full community of the campus of William and Mary. Or else the Black students and Black members of this community are always going to feel ostracized and left to the side because our history is not represented here. It's the history of the College of William and Mary for the white students who came here. However, Black student people literally built this city and this campus, and they are not seen anywhere in that building. For this history to be put together and acknowledged, it has to be done and done to a certain level. There has to be a level of acknowledging what the Black community at Williamsburg built. That next step has to happen. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Next, I have Lonnie Wright.
Lonnie Wright, 710 With Lane. Hello, Council.
Welcome.
In light of the racial reckoning and continued systemic injustice in our country, I would like to urge our council members to take action, to do more than merely say we acknowledge our history of slavery, of Jim Crow, of blatant racism. It is time for us to take a stand with more than words, to for once be remembered on the side of good, on the side of equality, and to help move the nation forward. It has been nearly 30 years since the decision to create the Martin Luther King Memorial Site, and we have seen little progress. While I understand that a committee has been created, I urge you to source ideas from the community and to give consistent updates to the community on its progress. However, a memorial is not enough. I urge you, as you go into your meetings on the next cycle, to determine how policies currently in place disenfranchise the members of the Williamsburg community in relation to housing, business, and policing, amongst other areas. Williamsburg has a long history of not only being complicit, but in perpetuating the systems that allow for these inequalities to survive and thrive, from selling enslaved people to pushing out Black business owners and residents, leaving them on the fringes. So to close, I would like to reiterate the points that Afoma made earlier. We want to see tangible policies that address and acknowledge Williamsburg's part in racism, concrete plans for the creation of the Martin Luther King Memorial Site, education efforts by the city that tell accurate histories, not only in colonial Williamsburg, but throughout the rest of the city, and a partnership with the College of William and Mary and the Lemon Project to begin exploring reparation efforts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, I have Alamira Adil. Welcome.
For allowing us to speak at this forum. My name is Almira Adili. I live at 614 York Street. I am here in solidarity with the Black residents of Williamsburg. I think it's important to understand that we're not speaking as just students at William and Mary. A lot of us end up sticking around in this area, and the community at William and Mary is an integral part of Williamsburg that has shown to basically have the same sentiments despite the fact that people come and go. And I hope that you take what we say seriously. I personally plan to stick around for at least another few months after I graduate. So I basically wanted to urge you to not just think about anti-racism and removing a monument in Williamsburg or erecting monuments for specific individuals, but to think about it in terms of housing policy, in terms of policy in regards to COVID relief and how you support specific businesses. I'm particularly invested in the concept of poverty in Williamsburg and how we can see residents who can't really even be residents here, who live in basic slums, in motels, who live day to day. It is atrocious that we have so few low-income housing units in Williamsburg that people can apply to live in. And it is a failure, honestly, of this city council to not address these problems, the median income in Williamsburg is supposedly $70K. And so something that is 30% of $70K is still like, you'd roughly have to make $40K a year to be able to afford what is considered lower income housing here. That's kind of ridiculous from my point of view. I have ultimate respect for you, but I hope that as you consider housing policies, tenant policies, perhaps like restructuring how we do policies within Williamsburg on housing, you take this into consideration. And as, to echo the other students that have spoken, racism is implicit in all of our systems, and it's something that we have to actively fight against rather than just condemn with our words. So again, I thank you for all the efforts that you've already put in, and I hope that my words aren't too harsh. And I hope that you, specifically within housing, employment, and other areas, really use your power to actively enfranchise the members of your community that some of whom work here and spend all of their time here and just cannot afford to live in a city with such high prices for rent and housing. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Billy. Next, I have Kermit Bay. Welcome, sir.
I'm Kermit Bay. I'm in the 4200 block of Long Hill Road. I've been a lifelong resident of Williamsburg, James City County, and I must say for these 55 years that I've been a resident, I've lived under the tyranny of white minority domination, also known as white supremacy. It's a heavy weight on my shoulders daily. It's totally burdensome, and it's real. I was in attendance at the rally on Saturday, and one of the speakers, a gentleman, he mentioned that he was an abolitionist. And he quoted from the Constitution. I'm going to paraphrase a little bit of part of his statement, but he mentioned that if the people are dissatisfied with the government, they have the right to alter or to abolish that government. While I agree with that statement, however, it is my belief that the so-called African-American community has not the power to alter nor abolish this said government. So I advocate for full and complete freedom. You may ask why full and complete freedom. It is only under those conditions that the so-called African-American is allowed to grow into the fullness or to the fullest manifestation of who we really are. And then you may ask the question, well, who are we? Those of you with enlightened minds, you guys know who we are. History is written and it attests to the greatness from whence we came. Under this particular system, it'll always be that person, that thing, or that system that tries to place a ceiling on our abilities. There's been millions of African Americans who have lived and died having not fulfilled their abilities. And I think under this current system, there'll be a million more who have lived and died having not come into the full completeness of their greatness. And then you may ask, well, define your idea of full and complete freedom. My definition of full and complete freedom is separation. We need land of our own, control and ownership of our institutions. We need the opportunity for business and economic development. One of the founding fathers, I think he understood this same idea when he penned, and I quote, and this is Thomas Jefferson I'm quoting, nothing is more certainly within the book of faith than that these people are to be free. Nor is it less certain that the two races equally free cannot live in the same government. Nature, habit, opinion have drawn indelible lines of destruction between them. Mr. Jefferson also expressed his fear on the matter when he penned this statement, and I quote, "Indeed, I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just, that his justice cannot sleep forever, that considering numbers, nature, and the natural means, only a revolution of the wheel of fortune, an exchange of situations is among possible events, that it may become probable by supernatural interference." Full and complete freedom. Separation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bay.
Thank you.
Next, I have Ms. Laura Hill. Welcome, ma'am.
Good afternoon, Mayor Pons, City Councilmen, and citizens of Williamsburg. My name is Laura Hill, and I live at 4452 Powhatan Crossing in Williamsburg, Virginia. I am here representing the historic Triangle chapter of Coming to the Table. We are a national racial reconciliation organization, and I believe the adage, as goes Virginia, so goes the nation. But I prefer to say, as goes Williamsburg, so goes the nation. Williamsburg is the colonial capital of Virginia. And we believe that as healing, racial equity, and reparations are established in the birthplace of our nation, that it will reverberate throughout the nation. Our aim is to help to establish the city of Williamsburg as a state and national leader in racial healing, racial justice, and racial equity. As Williamsburg is the colonial capital of Virginia, we know that 17th and 18th century laws were passed here to enslave, to disadvantage, to disenfranchise, and to discriminate against people based on the color of their skin. So now I am proposing a resolution to apologize for the city of Williamsburg's role in slavery and institutionalized racism. Now I am proposing that the city of Williamsburg join other municipalities such as Evanston, Illinois, and Asheville, North Carolina, in making amends by adopting reparations initiatives. If we take these steps, we can heal our city. And as I indicated, I believe that it will reverberate and it will cause our nation to heal. And we have seen nationwide that there is a climate of unrest, there is a climate of racial unrest and unprecedented racial violence. And racial injustice started here. And we have to deal with it here at the root. And I believe it will reverberate throughout the nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hill.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else here that would like to come forward? Seeing none, I'll close the open forum. There's nothing else on the agenda. Is there a motion?
I've got a question, a
Mr.
clarification. So about 6 months ago, I asked for an update on what is the status of the Martin Luther King Memorial. And I think at that time, I was told that we were no longer invited to be part of that process. Has anything changed since then?
No. As far as I know, since I was involved in the creation of the committee, and I talked to Brian Smalls, and I think Councilman Rogers has as well, and I think that at the last meeting, they identified some various things that they wanted to recognize as part of the memorial, but hadn't come to exact ideas on how they were going to do that, how much it was going to cost, exactly where it was going to be, and whether it was going to be one memorial or spread out in different parts of the city. So that was the last update I had, having been a member of that committee, and I don't know if you've spoken to him recently.
I can update to an extent. I think there's been a lot of busyness in the recent months, so the committee has had some trouble meeting. I'll be speaking to the chairman of that committee, Brian Smalls, tomorrow, and I'm happy to update council on its current ongoings. I know they still would like to establish that memorial. I know I would too, so I can happily reach out to council to let everybody know what their current timeline is and where the conversation is.
And maybe after that, would it be appropriate to have communication from council through city manager that, you know, we stand ready to help them when they want us back at the table?
Right.
Right, and we've made that clear. And when the organization or the committee was founded, the then mayor Freiling committed funding from the city's budget. We still maintain that funding availability when they're ready for it. There were also some matching opportunities. I don't know if they still exist, but they did at the time that would help further the cause. So,
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else? Motion?
So I move to adjourn.
Second.
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Thank you, everybody.
Adjourn.